One thing I love about working with teens is that they have a unique view on the world. They are capable of understanding more than younger children, but for better or worse, and it's often less than they think and more than we think, that they get things. Listening to them speak about potential post-high school or post-college plans, and hearing them tell me why they think one path might be a better fit for them is a window into their understanding of the world. Over the years, some choose a path because they find it interesting or they think it will be challenging. Others because they like the salary that comes with it. Others because it means more time in school or perhaps less time in school. Or that they like the learning it will entail. Recently, I've heard more teens express a newer reason behind their thought process, that they believe their chosen path will be more resilient in the rapidly expanding world of artificial intelligence. For their chosen paths, they may be right or wrong about whether that particular path will be resilient to AI, time will tell. But either way, it's a very valid consideration these days. We too might ask ourselves, to what extent will continued AI advancement make aspects of our world, our jobs, our life, obsolete or categorically different? We already had one joke tonight that the words were not written by AI, and I don't even think you knew what I was talking about. I wish I could say that was planned. However, rather than focus on what AI might be able to do, I want to change the question to think about what AI can't do, but that we as humans can. Perhaps it's Descartes' oft-quoted, "I think, therefore I am." Perhaps it's the Bible's response that we are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and with it have the ability for moral reasoning. Is it our ability to feel? I'm not so arrogant as to think I can give a complete answer on the human condition in one sermon and still have you come back for services in the morning. But we can still consider what makes us human, what makes our human experience unique from advanced AI capabilities. Imagine for a moment, and maybe for some of you this is a daily or multiple times a day occurrence, that you enter your house to an excited puppy. The dog may get the zoomies and run all over the house because he is just that excited you came back from getting the mail. And his antics, or her, crashes into a piece of furniture or knocks down that flower pot or skids down your floor. And for the most part, I imagine our reaction would be just as you have, to smile and laugh a little because of this clumsy, ridiculous puppy, rather than scolding the pet for not considering the consequences of their actions. Unlike that puppy, we expect more forethought from our human companions. We expect people to think about consequences, about whether their behavior is right or wrong, and how it will make someone else feel before engaging in that action. This whole period on our Jewish calendar is about reflecting upon those very aspects of our behavior in this past year, making amends, making corrections, in the hopes that this coming year will be better. Unlike us, AI can't debug itself. But the snag for us humans, and in Latin we're Homo sapiens, thinking men or people, we often don't like to think. Whether it is a child running around alongside that crazy puppy on impulse, or an adult avoiding their internal thought by adding external stimulation, we generally avoid thinking, and according to some scientific studies, find it quite unpleasant. In one series, a group of researchers wanted to see exactly how uncomfortable a 15-minute thinking time would be. They thought their participants would enjoy sitting and having a chance to think. Some were even given topics to think about, like their summer vacations. They put these participants in a room alone to think, and then they made it a little more fun. They put one item in the room, a button that would deliver an electric shock, which each participant said before the study they would pay money not to be shocked by. About half, and I could go into details on why I think this is, but it was 67% of the men and 25% of the women pushed the button instead of staying alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. I won't go into gender differences, I promise. The researchers suggest that it may have been the pressure to think on demand versus randomly daydreaming, I don't know, during the rabbi's sermon perhaps, that made the experience particularly difficult or unpleasant. Perhaps sheer curiosity of how bad that shock would be, I don't know. And so this line of research continued and came to the conclusion that this thinking time can be more positive if we practice thinking for pleasure. And every time I read that, it was like reading for pleasure, but in your own brain. Ideally, our services on Rosh Hashanah, Shabbat Shuvah, and Yom Kippur will help you create this space to think for pleasure and meaning without needing an electrical shock. Don't worry, no buttons here are equipped with an electrical shock. It would violate Shabbat. In our Torah portion, tomorrow morning, as the binding of Isaac, as that narrative opens, Abraham will hear the call to sacrifice his child, to seemingly obey without question. And as we think of things that AI can't do that we can, when we give an inquiry to AI, for those who have used a chatbot perhaps, it will answer you no matter what your motives are. It will never question why you ask. And we rabbis often use the Akedah and the binding of Isaac with Abraham's sort of blind faith here to stand in contrast to the story a little bit earlier with Sodom and Gomorrah, where Abraham famously does argue with God. Being human means understanding when to follow orders, when to be a good soldier, and do without question. But I also wonder if during the binding of Isaac, did that keep Abraham up at night? During those 3 days they were walking in silence, was he calm and collected? What was his brain doing? Was he wishing there was a button? Is that very ability to connect and attach emotions and possibilities to the thoughts we have can cause us to get caught up in our heads. These intrusive thoughts, the wondering if we acted correctly, or what we should do, or how we might navigate the next big work project, and this part's just for the office staff, such as a synagogue database. Global concerns, environmental concerns, and more are things that might keep us up at night. And there's a growing tendency, especially among millennials, and I know our generation is not alone, to add an outside voice, to silence, or to distract from that inner chatter that makes us human to begin with. Perhaps it's the thought that if I bombard my brain with stimulation, be it a podcast, music, the radio, reading, knitting, fidgeting, it'll quiet or distract from the inner chatter. And as a bonus for those options with sound, it might even make me feel less alone, as if somebody were in the room with me. By doing this, we won't have to ruminate or overthink or worry, and perhaps we might even switch to autopilot. We say we want to hear meaningful and thoughtful things, but frequently it's not our own thoughtful things we want to hear. To be more fully human, we must open our hearts and our heads to critical and creative thinking, just as our ancestors did. And this also makes us good Reform Jews. In the 18 and 1900s, critical and creative thinking allowed the early reformers in Germany to adapt Jewish tradition and practice to the innovation of the modern world burgeoning around them. We are now experiencing another shift in the available tools, and we too must decide how to use it. How can AI be a part of our life? How can it help us be more human? As more technology and resources are going the way of the dodo, which I hear the Apple Lightning cord might be going that way too. The new iPhone will have the same charger as every other phone. And it will join perhaps CD players and DVD players and iPods and Palm Pilots and a plethora of other technology. Remember needing to memorize math formulas or facts because, and I can hear teachers' voices in my heads, you won't always have a calculator around. But now all of our phones have more powerful calculators and certainly better games to sneak use of during math class than we had back in those days. There are time-consuming tasks that AI can do in seconds, like those math problems. Instead of mulling through old lesson plans and various books for activity ideas, or God forbid, coming up with their own, I've heard several teachers say that they can ask an AI chatbot for lesson plan ideas, such as teaching the quadratic formula using a potato. It will give you a lesson plan. I fact-checked that one. Or translating a psalm into a pirate shanty to make it more appealing to middle schoolers. I chose not to use that one in services during Elul. It can create the framework of a database, it can design a coloring book, analyze raw data, and so much more. But its biggest limitation, and it will tell you this before you make a search, that it is only as good as the information it is built from, and it can only spit out the information it is given. For a fun fact, I did ask ChatGPT to write a sermon on being human in a world with AI, just to see what it would come up with. My sermon was better. But it gave me 550 words, and it was really dry. There were no jokes. There were no references to this time of year of high holidays. There were no little anecdotes of excited puppies, because AI can't do that unless you tell it specifically to do so. It won't give you a lesson on the quadratic formula with a potato unless you give it the idea of including a potato. We can add these things to make a speech more appealing, but it cannot create them. What AI gains in being able to crunch data and pull different sources, it lacks in critical thinking, creativity, and emotional appeal. It doesn't make itself real. So as it surrounds us with its algorithms and coding in social media, navigation software, automated processes everywhere, parts of our lives have been improved. I certainly have not gotten lost nearly as much as before GPS existed. But sometimes using fewer brain cells because of automation can lead us to use less creativity and less innovation unless we actively seek to continue to put it in, whether in our search terms or afterwards. AI can speed research and make text accessible, and what will we do with the time we gain because it did it for us? I've heard it said before that the internet started to put the post office out of business, but then it was internet shopping that has kept the post office in business. People worried about that self-checkout would put cashiers out of jobs, but it seems now those jobs have been replaced with curbside pickup. Who need shoppers inside to do it for them? So while AI may do some things for us, it creates new openings. The doctor who now gets test results with anything outside the norm highlighted can spend a little more time with the patient explaining those test results. A student with dyslexia or someone with a visual impairment can have a text read to them and then get to studying faster instead of trying to decode and understand the words of the text. We can do these things that AI can't because we have AI. As we enter this year, perhaps we embrace it, perhaps we'll avoid it altogether or be somewhere in between. But what we can't escape is that our brains and our thoughts are with us. Reform Judaism has stood on the grounds that we don't follow only in the footsteps of our ancestors without hesitation. We don't just carry the firewood up the hill asking no questions or only a few questions along the way. We think critically and creatively about our tradition, our texts, our ideas about the world, and we work and we reconcile and we negotiate them with the ever-changing world around us. Reform Judaism was formed out of a time of intellectual change, and Jews and Judaism, I believe, unlike all of our adversaries in the past, endure to this day because of our ability to change and adapt. So how will we embrace this new technology while also embracing our ability to connect with the past, with our creativity, with the present, and be able to think? In the 10 days ahead, in the full year ahead, I invite you to work on thinking for pleasure, perhaps getting lost intentionally in our prayer book, allowing yourself a period to daydream. The insides of our brains are far from scary places once we allow ourselves in to get more comfortable. So let the robots do the vacuuming, the math, the researching, the shopping, and more, so that we can build on that base with our creativity, our thoughtfulness, our connection. We have the power to evaluate and choose. And as we will be reminded towards the end of these 10 days, we must choose life. We must choose to think. We must choose to live with meaning and intention, to engage in thought that allows us to make this year ahead and the world around us a little bit better, because we are here. Ken Yehi Ratzon.
We continue on page 78. We have our Kiddush cup.